taking a little more risk puts a little more edge on it, makes it a little more fun. I don't really know why, other than like it just is more fun.
There's falling rock, there's falling ice, there's you falling, there's avalanches, there's mountain weather, there's so many variables that are beyond our control.
Having someone die is the quickest way that people, go from one side of that line to the other side of the line really fast.
Like, I recognize the risk, but I don't ever assume that it will result in my death.
I had a fall near the top where I fractured some bones in my face.
Really, that was beyond a close call. I mean, I could have, a couple seconds one way or another, I would have been dead.
So I started thinking ski touring was cool the winter of my senior year of high school, and I started kind of messing around a little bit. I feel like a lot of us go through a progression. Like, we start out with, skiing at the resort or climbing in the gym. And then we, sort of move on to sort of, what people would call more risky, I guess you couldn't really call it, a higher quality activity, but, a more risky activity that takes a little more skill, starting to climb on real rock or starting to ski in the backcountry. And that progression, it kind of works up to, very hard rock or very hard ice climbing, or, for the sort of, resort skier to backcountry skier, it kind of, works towards alpine. Skiing hard alpine stuff, that's kind of where stuff always goes. And everyone, I feel like most people sort of want to progress their limits and kind of move forward in that manner. I guess it doesn't really answer the question of why is it worth it? But that's I think why people end up there.
That is an enormous cut.
Taking a little more risk puts a little more edge on it, makes it a little more fun. I gain a higher entertainment quality from skiing steep or climbing steep or climbing hard than I do from just skiing easy runs at the resort or going for an easy trail run. I don't really know why, other than it just is more fun. The risk is a lot higher, and your tolerance to accept that risk is a lot higher. I do things, and then I get down and I'm I shouldn't have done that. I should not have taken that risk, and that was stupid of me in the moment. I feel like most people who've skied in the backcountry for a few years have close calls with avalanches, and I have, and it's very easy to reflect back and be I should have seen the warning signs. I should not have skied that. That was a mistake. And the same with getting it over your head on ice or hard alpine, especially solo. I mean, it's hard to there's no recourse to turn back. And when you're halfway up, it's easy to be why did I choose to do this? And I probably shouldn't have.
Do you think that your perception of risk aligns with the actual risk?
I like to think that it does. I recognize that my risk tolerance is often higher than most people's, than I differ from other people in that manner. And it's also important to recognize, I'm a 22-year-old male, and our brains at this, age are wired a little bit differently. They're wired to take risks and to accept risks and to sort of enjoy adrenaline. So it's difficult to parse that apart from how dangerous the activity you're taking part in actually is. And then it's difficult to remove yourself from what other people think the risk would be. To think about it for yourself and not for what other people would think it would be like. But I think that ice climbing in a traditional manner, roped up with protection on solid, not rotten ice, is a fairly safe activity in the realm of mountain sports. I think it's perceived as very dangerous, and I don't think that it is. I think that for doing it in the traditional manner with ropes and harnesses and in a safe manner belaying, I think that it's quite safe. I think it changes radically as soon as you start to solo. And I think that for all roped up sports, I think it's easy to be sort of scared on very technical terrain, even when you're roped up, when it's truly, it's probably not actually that dangerous because you have protection. And it's easy to be not scared and think that there's not risk on sort of moderately technical terrain solo. I think it might be kind of like the way the human brain is wired. Like we recognize risk and we can't quite logically, or at least I can't quite logically sort out that it's either with a rope or without.
My beginnings as an alpinist were really kind of gradual, and I took little steps. It went from, hiking at Mount Zion, scrambling up the haystacks, and to venturing a little further out, going for peaks that required some off-trail bushwhacking and some scrambling, and then eventually started finding myself on steep snow and onto glaciers. So it was really kind of a gradual growth. I think that most alpine climbs that come appealing to us naturally occur in a riskier environment. I mean, alpine climbing a lot of times is it's in the vertical world, and there's falling rock, there's falling ice, there's you falling, there's avalanches, there's mountain weather, there's so many variables that are beyond our control. When we go out there, we try to manage the risks that are within our control by, choosing the right conditions, the safest conditions, and choosing our gear wisely and choosing our partners wisely. But there's always some element of randomness, and I think that in alpine climbing, the consequences are higher than, say, going out for a trail run or doing climbing up a crag, and there's a little more uncertainty. You're closer to the edge, so definitely I think there's more risk. I think that when we engage in risky activities, we have a kind of a heightened sense of alertness, and so many things become more real. A lot of people say that when they're in kind of a dangerous or risky situation, they feel like their senses are heightened and they can feel their blood pumping and they can think more clearly, or they just kind of feel in the moment. And there are very few things in life that can make you feel the present and really get out of worrying about the past or worrying about the future, worrying about daily lives, and really transport you to kind of a different experience, a different existence. I don't know if risk is necessary for everyone to feel that sort of experience. There's certainly the highest level of risk. I think there's also kind of a tipping point where it becomes so risky that it's no longer fun, and the risk becomes too apparent. So it's definitely a balance to make it feel like you're doing something where you're closer to the edge, to have that thrill, but then also not just be overwhelmed with fear. With our recent climb of Sloan Peak, I had a fall near the top of the route, right at the end, where I fractured some bones in my face and almost had to get helicoptered out. Luckily, we were able to get down the mountain and ski out ourselves, and that was a situation where there were a lot of variables going on, and I made some poor decisions, of course, and I feel like the risk we were facing was manageable, and it was more the fault of my decision-making than necessarily the situation we put ourselves in. But it also has made me so much more acutely aware of how one little mistake, even if it's something I can control, when you're up there, can put you into such a tough situation in terms of rescue, and can go from an adventure to a struggle for life very fast. So it definitely has made me think more about, I guess, the own flaws, the flaws in my decision making. Think about an alpine climbing so much in reducing the risks that are around us, but really ultimately it was a risk that I could have avoided myself, and that's something that I'm going to be more aware of going forward. Is realizing that even though I've been doing this for a number of years and I've had good success and I've had relatively few accidents, I'm not immune to poor decision making and certain flaws based on the situation or based on fatigue and different heuristic traps and stuff like that. In that climb, I still believe that the risk was worth the reward. It was a fantastic climb and something that both of us had dreamed of. I mean, I definitely feel very guilty about the fall on Sloan and how it made my family very stressed for a few hours, worrying about my safety and worrying if they were going to see me again. person. I've certainly gotten lucky in other situations where I actually probably had more risk, and looking back, definitely made some bad decisions. I hope that my perception of risk now is closer to what the true risk is, but I also acknowledge that my perception is always evolving, and that in itself must mean that there's some uncertainty in my perception of the risk, and the risk also will change as my abilities change and my experience changes. But then there's also other things where I've realized there's so much more uncertainty, and I think a big one, and that is like with ice climbing. Even though I have a fair bit of experience, I can see how quickly the medium of ice can change depending on the conditions, and how the difficulty of the climbing can change very quickly. And I feel like as I've learned more about ice climbing, I actually see that there are so many different things that can happen, and there's a lot of risk there that is more inherent to the sport that maybe I wasn't exposed to when I started. The most important people to me are my family members, so my sister, my parents, my grandparents. Well, to be honest, I don't really think that my relationship with my family changes my risk tolerance that much. If there's something that I feel like I shouldn't do because it's risky, it's precisely because that. It's not like, oh, this is too risky for my family. It's like I should not be doing this because for myself, almost from a selfish perspective. Like, obviously, if I were to die, it would be very difficult for my family, but I don't want to die myself too. I don't see it that much differently. If it's something too risky for me to do because I have a family, it's something too risky to do for myself personally. Maybe it'll be different when I have kids. It probably will feel different. Usually I'll go a whole day in the mountains, even on the approach and the descent, and never think about my family or anything. That's like one of the things that I think as alpine climbers we seek. It's what we love about the mountains, is how we're so in the moment. And that's an experience that other people have to resort to, drugs, sex, and other things to get that kind of high. But we can get that sort of experience just by being in the mountains.
My name's Doug Hutchinson. I'm 51 years young. I grew up in New York, so I started to kind of backpack and do that sort of stuff as a Boy Scout in my teens or whenever, and then started to go away when we got all driver's license up to the Adirondack Mountains and then later the White Mountains in New Hampshire, where I was just, a backpacker, scrambler, and kind of a beginning backcountry skier through college. So I really didn't buy a rope until I graduated from college. Then I moved out to Oregon specifically for the mountains and started going through it, I think, as a normal kind of process of starting to slog up volcanoes in the summer and ski in the winter, and then started to just combine those things where I was, skiing and climbing, and then went from mountaineering to ice climbing, and then went from rock climbing as just a little bit of a thing to learn to become its own focus. And really it's continued basically unabated for, almost 30 years now, just playing in the mountains as much as possible. And the weird thing about me at my age is instead of peaking in my 20s and then feeding the rat, if you will, and then having the stoke or the bug go down, it's been like a long, slow increase, meaning I like it more, I think about it more, and I want to do it more now than I did when I was 25 or 26. Mountains are dangerous places, and the more time you spend in them, the higher your risk is. The short answer would be because the overall reward is much greater, much richer, so you're willing to take on more risk, and that's that risk relation thing. It's just much more rewarding to top out on a big mountain than it is to top out on a single pitch climb, so you're willing to take on more risk. I haven't lost any close friends or regular partners in the mountains, which again, for someone of my age, for better or for worse, somewhat unique, and I won't be surprised that I won't be able to say that statement, at some point. I used to be a lot more conservative and play it probably arguably way too safe, which is why it's taken me forever to move through certain grades that people blow through pretty quickly in their careers. But because of that, I think I haven't had a lot of those close calls that made me take a big step back. This crevasse bridge just collapsed and exploded. That was kind of like not, and really that was beyond a close call. I mean, I could have, a couple seconds one way or another, I would have been dead. But it was kind of you do this in the mountains. We just got ourselves into a position where we either had to walk back out 3 days or we had to take kind of an unacceptable risk to cross this very thin bridged crevasse. And, I knew in my head that I was crossing a line that normally I would never be crossing, but I also knew that the thought of walking out 3 days was just not going to happen. So I crossed that line and I barely made it. But the weird thing is it didn't make me dial anything back because I knew I was taking on kind of an unacceptable high level of risk, and my gut feeling was right, and I missed literally dying by 10 seconds. It kind of went the same way I expected it to go. It confirmed your bias, and so you just go, yep, that's what I thought, and you keep moving forward. Having someone die is the quickest way that people, go from one side of that line to the other side of the line really fast. My perception of risk is less than the real risk there, and I have a higher risk tolerance than I should. So I kind of know that academically, but everybody believes, that they're a better driver and they could text while driving because they're better than everybody else and all that stuff like that. So I have that exact same human nature quality. So I know my risk tolerance is higher than most people around me. When we're out there acting, my mind does the thing that most people's minds do, which is says, no, my perception is 100% accurate. Even though talking to you right now, I know academically, or I just know it's not, but my mind has the ability to say, of course, with my experience, I know exactly my perception of risk is good, but talking to you in my living room, I know I just am justifying it. And with if you're doing something across the road from Alpental versus doing it 4 days back in, you're definitely going to change your risk tolerance and how much risk you're willing to take. Most dangerous people are the newbies who don't know anything and don't know what they know. And then I've seen this, and I'm in this latter category, and the old farts who think they know everything. They're overconfident for a different reason, but it's still going to get them killed. Just like the newbies are overconfident out of ignorance, or they just took that one class and they think they know everything. The biggest thing of how much confidence you have or not confidence is your partners. I mean, when I'm with, a new climber and I know they're nervous, well, obviously my risk tolerance and my ability to accept risk goes way down. When I'm with a super strong, experienced climber, it probably goes way too high, and that, cliche, the mountain doesn't care that you're an expert kind of thing is really true, but you're willing to take on a lot more risk because of the strength, the collective strength of your party. And I've been definitely guilty of it. I mean, you take on risk for things like avalanche danger, which, again, it doesn't matter how experienced your partner is. The mountain doesn't care, a cornice collapse, a serac, all that stuff. You shouldn't be taking on more risk just because you have a really experienced partner, but it's natural to do that. Since I don't have anyone dependent upon me, monetarily, whatever, I haven't had to dial back my risk the way that it's natural to do when you start to have more and more people dependent upon you. So without a doubt, I assume it plays a part for everybody. how much they have to quote-unquote lose and how many people are dependent on them. So without a doubt, and that's why single dudes in their 20s may or may not take the most risk out there because they think they have the least to lose. You have to play a lot of mental games and talk yourself into the fact that you're climbing on this medium that was flowing water several days before, it's going to be flowing water, and several days later, you have no idea what's going on with cracks and structure in it. You have no idea if it was negative 40 last week or whatever. I know when I'm ice climbing that it doesn't make any sense. It's a crazy endeavor, and I know this is risky, and that's why it's so rewarding. Getting to the top of a big ice climb is so rewarding just because it's so risky, and you're dancing with this medium that you're just, you pretend that you have all this experience and you can evaluate it right. But I know I do the best I can with my experience, but I know that when the pillar collapses, I can't say, oh, I didn't see that coming. Of course I didn't see it coming. If I thought it was going to collapse, I probably wouldn't get on it. But any ice climber that's climbed for any length of time knows they're kind of crossing a line, and they just have to, suspend their disbelief and just do it. And that's what makes it really rewarding. I know that there's a real risk that I'm taking on, but I, find ways like everybody to justify why that risk is worth it. And to date, it has been. But ice climbing is just like skiing. I mean, it's just a matter of time until something comes, either the whole ice comes down or enough stuff falls on you that you're going to have lots of close calls. I have a little bit different take on this than most people would, where it's just a weird take. I didn't decide to be born, brought into this world, and someone else decided that for me, but I get to decide how I live my life within reason.
I was first compelled to make this video and conduct these interviews following some close calls in the mountains. When asked why I do what I do, especially when the consequences are so absolute, I realized that I was unable to convey my reasons for taking the risks that I do. All I knew was that whenever I wasn't climbing in the mountains, I wished I was, and when I was climbing in the mountains, my mind was quiet and I felt in control and in the moment. Talking with Peter, Kyle, and Doug added some clarity to the ways I personally explore and approach risk. It seems that the climbers I spoke with don't climb in the mountains for all the same reasons. However, some commonalities that I see between these three climbers' reasons and my own is that we all feel more alive and engaged as the situations get riskier. Of course, as Kyle mentioned, if there is too much risk, then we feel more fear than is enjoyable. We all think we know the risk and the consequence. However, there's a lot of uncertainty that is inherent to alpine environments, and with this greater uncertainty comes greater risk. Doug says that the experience is richer when you're climbing in alpine terrain, so you're willing to accept more risk. The three climbers I spoke with agree that the risk and uncertainty associated with climbing alpine routes is part of what makes them attractive objectives in the first place. These big alpine routes usually have lots of no-fall zones. When I am in one of these zones, where a fall would almost certainly result in death, all that is on my mind is executing every move perfectly. There is no mental space beyond that to focus on things like falling or real-world problems. This clear and focused headspace is what we are after when we are climbing in the mountains. After going through a no-fall zone, sometimes I worry about what others would think of the risks I've taken. Peter mentioned that it can be difficult to remove yourself from what other people think the risk would be. It can be very difficult to dismiss outside pressures and just think about risk for ourselves, but when we do, we find a freedom and focus that we can't find anywhere else in our lives. Perhaps it is in these moments, with our senses distilled down to just what is necessary to survive, we find the most human experience.